Hey chemistry students, this is Mrs. Miller again, and today what I'm going to talk about is significant figures, but this time we're going to be talking about sig figs in operations. In the previous video, you guys learned how to identify sig figs, so now we're going to learn how to figure out the correct answer when we add, subtract, multiply, and divide. As you go through and you start to do different operations, you're going to notice that we're going to split our operations into two areas that each have their own rule. So the first one that we are going to be looking at is adding and subtracting. Adding and subtracting have the same rule when we talk about answers with their sig figs. So the rule that we look at, we make it kind of simple. Sig figs match the least number of digits past the decimal place. So that's pretty important for us. So we want to look past the decimal place and we want the least number that's there. Numbers ahead of the decimal don't impact anything. So the example that we have here is 14.45 plus 87.4. So this one obviously goes to the hundredths or 2 past decimal. This one only goes to the tenths or 1 past the decimal. So what we're going to do is we have to go with the least past, which is only 1. So our answer can only go to the tenths place. So when you put this in your calculator, of course, this is not quite the answer that you get. You end up getting 101.85. However, we can only go to the tenths place, and this is where rounding is going to occur. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at this 5. What does it do to this 8? And based on rounding rules, 5 and up, round up. So that's how we get 101.9 as an answer here. So that would be the proper sig fig answer. We're going least past the decimal place. Here we have 3 examples of adding and subtracting practice. So we have 1, 2, and 3. What I'd like you guys to do is just to get your calculator answer. So go ahead, plug these in a calculator. You guys can click pause, and we'll come back to this in just a moment. So what you guys should have gotten for your calculator answers is the first one. We have 1.345 plus 9.81. So your answer for this one should have ended up being 11.155. For our second one, 12.1 minus 8.600. My calculator, you get 3.5. And then you have 189 minus 15.89. I end up with 173.11. That was kind of a bad 1. There you go. All right, so what we want to look at next is we have to go with our rule, which is least, sorry about that, least past decimal. So what we're going to do then is we're going to look here. This goes to the thousandth or 3 places past. This one only goes 2 after. So our answer has to go to the hundredths place. So the hundredths place is the second past the decimal. So then we're going to see, what does this 5 do to this 5? Well, according to proper rounding rules, it should round up. So our answer for this one is 11.16. For our next value, we have 1 past the decimal place, or going to the tenths place, versus this one that goes 3 past, or to the hundredths place. So we can only go to the tenths place. And in this case, our calculator answer is going to be the same as our sig fig answer. Number 3, we have none past the decimal place for our first value. And we have 2 going past the decimal place, or getting to the hundredths. So we can have nothing past decimal. So we look at the 2 between the decimal. Is this 3 going to do anything? Is the 1 going to do anything to our 3? Of course not. It's too little. So our answer is 173. So that's how we use the least past the decimal place for adding and subtracting. Here we have some additional practice, and this would be addition and subtraction. So again, when we look at addition and subtraction, it's least past decimal. So if you want to go ahead and you want to try these on your own, go ahead and pause the video. Otherwise, I'm going to go through, show you my calculator answer, and then my actual answer. So go ahead and pause and try this on your own. All right, so I put this in my calculator, and I have 100 minus 25.4. When I go ahead and do that, I end up with 74.6. So with addition and subtraction, I have to look at least past decimal. Here, I don't have a decimal place, so it's none. Here, I go to the tenths place because that's where that one goes. So in this case, I cannot go past the decimal based on that 100. So when I look at this, what happens with my 6? Does it impact my 4 at all? Of course it does. So my answer is going to be 75 with proper sig figs. Next, when I take 3.14159 plus 2.578, what I end up with in my calculator is 5.71959. Here when I look, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 past the decimal place. Here I only have 3 or going to the thousandths, so I can only go 3 past, so 1, 2, 3. What does this 5 do to my 9? Well, of course, you're going to change and round up. So you end up with 5.72 because this 9 ends up rounding up my 1. And then we put in a 0. If you don't have that 0, it's going to be incorrect because this one counts as that sig fig. My last one here, I have 17.55 minus 2.5. When I put that in my calculator, I end up with 15. Here we go to the hundredths. Here I also go to the hundredths place. So I need an answer that goes to the hundredths place. So how can I do that? Well, the easiest way of doing that is adding a decimal and then adding in zeros. These zeros are significant because they are going to be behind a decimal as well as something that is significant. I find that the multiplication and division is way, way easier because when we look for our answer, we go least sig figs overall. So we're not messing around with our decimal places and things like that. So our example that we have here is 23.40 times 16.1. What we get here is we get 377 only because of our sig figs. Here, when I look, I know that this value here has 4 sig figs. Remember that 0 is significant because there's something significant ahead of it plus the decimal place. This one has only 3 sig figs. So my answer can only have 3 sig figs in it. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to practice these in just a sec. Just like last time, what I'd like you guys to do is to go ahead and put these in your calculator and just write down what your calculator answer is going to be, please. So you can pause the video and then come back. What I did is I went through and I calculated these. So for number 1, 14.78 times 12.220, I ended up with 180.6116. For 15.0 divided by 5.625, what I ended up with was 2.66666. Gosh, I don't even know how many sixes I have here. I'm going to estimate, sorry, there. And number 3, I had 84.63 times 1.98562, and I ended up with 168.0430.206. So see, that's a huge pain in the butt to actually write them out like this. So what we're going to do is we are going to use our rule, which is least sig figs overall. So what I'm going to do is in red, I'm going to write the number of sig figs above each number. So this one has 4 because they're all significant, non-zeros. This one has 5 because the 0 is significant because of something significant ahead of it, plus a decimal place. So we can only have 4 sig figs. So what you do, look at your 4th and the one behind it. Will that 1 do anything to the 6? Of course not. So you end up with 180.6. For our next value, you have 3 sig figs at 15.0. The 0 is significant because it has a decimal place and something significant ahead of it. And then we also have 4 sig figs with 5.625. We can only have 3. So we're going to look 1, 2, 3. Is this 6 going to do anything to the other 6? Heck yes it is. We're going to round it up. So you end up with 2.67. Last but not least, we're going to look here, and we have 4 sig figs with 84.63, and we have 6 sig figs with this value, 1.98562. So we can only have 4. So we're going to look at the 4th and the 5th. Is this 4 going to do anything to the 0? Heck no, it's not. So 168.0 is how we're going to get to that answer. So again, least sig figs overall. So you're going to have to look at both of the things that you are looking to multiply or divide and see how many sig figs are there. In this case, it worked out so it was all of the first values. That is not always the case. All right, and for our last practice problems, what we're going to do is some multiplication and division. So remember, we just talked about multiplication and division. The rule for this is least sig figs overall. Okay, so what I'd like you guys to do is to pause the video, try these on your own, get your calculator answer first, and then round a proper sig figs. So go ahead, pause this, and then I'll go through and show you my work as well. All right, so hopefully you guys have tried this on your own. So the first one, 98.76 divided by 14.5. When I put that in my calculator, I get a crazy long number of 6.81103448276. What a pain in the butt to write. I know that I'm going with least sig figs overall. This value has 4 sig figs. This value has 3 sig figs. Guess what? I can only have 3 sig figs. So I look at my 3rd and my 4th. Does this 1 do anything? Heck no, it doesn't. So I end up with 6.81. For my next one, when I take 100.0 times 25.4, I end up with 2,540. I know that my first value has 4 sig figs. The reason why that's 4 is this 0 is significant on the end because it has something significant ahead of it, being that 1, and a decimal place. The other zeros are significant because they are sandwiched zeros. And then these values are all significant, so you have 3 sig figs. So least number is 3 there. I can only have 3 sig figs, 1, 2, 3. I need to make sure that this 0 stays, that it's insignificant. So what I'm going to do is just write down my value with no decimal place. If you were to write 2540 with a decimal, this has 4 sig figs. That is wrong. We don't want that. Last but not least, we have 17.55 times 2.55. And when I put that one in my calculator, what I ended up with was 44.7525. So I need to look. I have 4 sig figs here, 3 sig figs here. I can only go with 3 sig figs. Look at my 3rd and my 4th. What does this 5 do to my 7? Well, of course, it rounds it up. So I end up with 44.8. So with multiplication division, it's always least sig figs overall. Later on in the year, what you're going to encounter is something called a conversion factor. A conversion factor is like what we see here. So 1 day is equivalent to 24 hours. 1 hour is equivalent to 60 minutes. 1 minute is equivalent to 60 seconds. So these conversion factors do not impact these values. So what you would do is whatever you start with, should match your answer. So here I have 3 sig figs. Here I also have 3 sig figs.